18, Paul says this, "If then you regard me as a partner, a fellow partaker of spiritual life, if you regard me as a partner, accept him as you would me." He says, just treat him the way you would treat me. I want Onesimus to have my righteousness in your eyes. Welcome him as you would welcome me. Forgive him as you would forgive me. Hold an obligation against him as you would hold an obligation against me. Just take him back just the way you would take me. Now for some of us, this is difficult. Imagine if someone comes back and they owe you a debt. They must repay that to fulfill all of the above. It's hard, isn't it, to picture this person as a righteous person. Paul is saying, the sinner in front of you, pretend he's me. For some of us, we can't really do that, can we? The more deeper our pain goes, it becomes difficult for us to imagine them as a righteous person. Because all we see is the sin they've committed against us. Here, Paul is asking out of love that to look at Onesimus, not for what he did, but to see him as the righteous person he has now become. Furthermore, what does Paul say in verse 18? He adds, "But if he has wronged you in any way or owes you anything, charge that to my account." Restitution is always an essential component of forgiveness. It would have been right for Philemon to say, "You will pay me back what it cost me to replace everything. I will take it out of your wages. You will work overtime, and you will restore back to me what you have stolen from when you left." That would be justice. There's actually nothing wrong with that. But neither is it wrong to be gracious. Graciousness is actually the higher road. Neither is it wrong to say, "I know you were an ungodly, sinful person. I understand the behavior that came with that. But since you are transformed, I no longer hold you responsible for what you did." It's difficult, right? To be able to get to that point. But Paul said, "All right, if he truly does owe you, I will pay it. I will pay whatever is owed. Charge it to my account." Just to take the pressure all off of Philemon, to force Philemon to forgive this guy. He's like, whatever he owes you, I will pay it back. Paul just says, add it to my bill. Now how do we know this will be paid back? Well, later on in verse 22, we will read that he says, "I'm coming to lodge with you." So we know Paul will return to Philemon at some point. And so if there's a debt owed, there it is. There needs to be amends. Sometimes the amends is to pay back if a person can do that. Key word there is if the person is capable of doing that. But sometimes the best kind of amends or restitution is really just sheer forgiveness and just the grace of God. In this case, there's a marvelous component added because I want you to follow the thought here. Paul is playing a very remarkably familiar part in the life of Philemon and Onesimus. I want you to picture it like this instead. Okay? Just picture this. Philemon is God. Righteous. Perfect. Good character. Who has been violated and defrauded. By who? Onesimus. The sinner. You and me who run away from God, who defraud God, who wasted our lives. Now, the sinner needs to be reconciled. Somebody has to pay the price. Christ paid the price. Paul is acting like Christ. Paul is saying, I want to be like Christ. I want to take the debt and the sin of Onesimus so that he can be reconciled for you. And that is the basis of our salvation. When Jesus died and was resurrected on the cross, he took your sin, paid for it. We were reconciled. We were forgiven before a righteous God who we defrauded, who we violated. Now for some of us, we're thinking, I can never defraud or violate anyone. I'm pretty good at not doing that. Like I said about the sixth commandment, you think, ladies and gentlemen, there is no institutional sin. There is no such thing as different variant levels of sin. Sin is sin. You commit one, you've committed all. That is how it works. You break one commandment, you've broken all 10. The basis of the 10 commandments is not to break a single one. So if you've broken one, you've done all. You see how that works? So here, Paul is saying, whatever Onesimus has sinned, I will take it all. Just like Christ did for us. Like Christ did for Paul and for Onesimus and for Philemon. The gospel for which Paul preaches, Paul is living out in this moment. Now some of you are like, well, I can't do that. He's Apostle Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, back in Romans, Apostle Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh. How he knows, I know what I'm supposed to do. In Romans, you can read all about it. Paul says, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what is right, but my flesh still does what's wrong. Paul complains how he's still a sinning man. How he's still doing things wrong. Yet in the book, in the letter of Philemon, we see what a Christ-like action in life should look like. In one letter, we see what it's supposed to look like. It gives you an insight on Paul, because Paul constantly calls everyone to be followers of me because I am a follower of Christ. To imitate Christ. Here you see Paul as the substitution for reconciliation, much like Christ. Never are we more like God than when we forgive. Never are we more like Christ than when we carry the debt so that forgiveness can take place. That is the point when they say, bear one another's burdens. Paul is acting like Christ. He says, I will take the consequence of his sin as long as you take him back. It's a beautiful perspective in the issue of restitution, of making amends. Billy Graham once said, we are the Bible the world is reading. We are the creeds the world is needing. And we are the sermons the world is heeding. It means we are examples to everyone else who does not know. Someone once says, you win by tenderness, but we conquer by forgiveness. Dwight L. Moody, one of my favorite quotes from him, says, the voice of sin is really loud. Therefore, the voice of forgiveness should be the loudest. I question those Christians who say they love the Lord and yet to forgive others, their hearts can't get on board. They tithe and go to church. Sometimes they read their Bible. But to those who have hurt them, they hold them still accountable. Forgiveness is an 11-letter word that they know how to spell out, but to understand its meaning, they are full of hesitation and doubt. They have chosen not to forget nor give to God their pain. To do so would mean to them all their suffering would be in vain. For deep in their souls they have become the judge, and to forgive others, their hearts would have to budge. And so they cling on to the past with hearts as cold as stone instead of giving over their grief to the one who judges from the throne. I wonder if they ever think, what if Jesus had thought this way? I wonder what Christians would then have to say. That was a poem written by Deborah Ann, Christian poet. She wrote this during a time where she learned that if she doesn't forgive, what would happen if Jesus had thought that about her? At the time of the cross, Jesus had thought, I don't need to forgive all of them. Let them burn in hell. Let them enjoy their short, insignificant lives, only to find out at the end, in eternity, they will burn. But instead, luckily for us, Christ didn't do that. Christ died on the cross. He followed God's plan for forgiveness out of love for His creation. Now, I'm quite confident that Philemon forgave and that he charged nothing to the Apostle Paul. Why? Because we read nothing of it later. There's nothing on it later that says Philemon charged Paul. How do we forgive? With reception. Open our arms. Take the person back personally into love. Second, restoration. Take them back into useful service. Third, make sure they have totally and completely had the debt settled. If they can pay it and it is just and their desire, receive that payment. If they cannot, offer forgiveness, and you at the same time can be the substitute for the reconciliation even to yourself. Such is not just the character of forgiveness, but such is the forgiveness that is behavior like Christ, action like Christ. Because God asked us to give forgiveness to one another. Jeremiah 31:34 says, For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Next week, we will go over the mindset of the one who forgives. What you should be thinking the whole time. We've learned the character, how you should act. Now we will learn about, and finally, the motives of the one who forgives. And I'll end with this, a quote by C.S. Lewis. To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable. Because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for your wonderful blessing.